You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative. And with me, as he is always, to talk about the assembled Avengers, John Mills.
Yes, I have appeared through a magic portal with my sling ring, and I'm looking for my cape. I would like to know where my cape is, because that thing's a rascal, and I think that it's out getting ice cream again, and it went without me. So,
you know, this is understandable. Does it not bring you back ice cream?
No, it's a very selfish cape. It's got a mind of its own, and you know, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, it shows up, it hogs the shower. You have no idea how long a cape can take in the shower. It's just really, it's like having a very inconsiderate roommate. But on the plus side, it helps me fly. So, you know, you give and take in a relationship.
Cape.
Yes, very true. Very, very, very true. Yes.
Well, obviously tonight here on Assembling Avengers, we are going to be talking about Doctor Strange in Phase 3. But before we get there, I do want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's listening. Thanks for checking out the 602 Club as well as Assembling Avengers. And we would love it if you would follow us over on Twitter at the 602 Club. We've got a nice little contest going on right now. So if you were to follow us, you could win a copy of a Star Wars book, Heir to the Empire. You can also find us on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We're also all over the place. Wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you're subscribed. And I do have a request. If you're a Spotify listener, give us some star ratings, because those have just become a thing, and they will help more people find us in Spotify, which is becoming an even bigger place to get podcasts. And if you maybe use the Apple system still and you've never given us a star rating or review there, we'd really appreciate that too, because, again, it helps more people find the show.
Indeed.
You can also find us, of course, online at Trek FM or at Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. And then we've got the listeners only discussion group you can join. And I do want to mention, especially as we are just in 2022, we could really use your help over on Patreon at patreon.com/Trek FM. And this is a listener-supported network. And without listeners like you, there's no way we can do this. So go to patreon.com/Trek FM and see how you can be part of the team. So, John, obviously, we know that before Marvel Studios became a thing, and, of course, too, before they started the MCU, Marvel films were just kind of all over the place in the sense of there are many different studios. Marvel, in fact, stole a lot of the rights to different characters because they needed money. And so this is actually a movie that had been in development hell for quite a long time. And I was really fascinated to learn that in 2007, Guillermo del Toro, as well as Neil Gaiman, had pitched an idea to Marvel with the desire to use the character Clea, which I don't know from the Marvel Universe. But I was like, wow, that is some pedigree in, like, fantasy horror type filmmaking and the genre. And they turned him down. I couldn't believe it.
They had to have had, I mean, by 2007, they had, I think, a little bit more of a cohesive view toward their goal, which was to have this big connected universe thing going on. Everybody forgets that they were doing that before Disney bought them. So that's not something that they just planned overnight and they said, yeah, let's go for it, because they would have been in planning at least for Iron Man, and definitely, I would say, the Incredible Hulk by that point, which came out shortly after. And it would have made sense for them to hold back and say, you know what, let's see if this experiment works. They didn't see that Disney was going to buy them, or maybe they did have some sort of indication. And so it would have given them even more reason to hold back, because they're trying to prove that they have a model that can work. And so I completely believe it. And the thing is, Guillermo del Toro, he has his name attached to so many things throughout the last 30 years. And it's because he has a very specific style. He has a very specific for lack of a better term, lane that he stays in. I'm intrigued by the idea of a Del Toro, Doctor Strange inspired property, because it would just be really interesting, because he would indulge. I mean, it would be more in the Hellboy type of feeling than in the MCU type of feeling that we got. Which,
I mean, the original Hellboy was pretty fantastic, actually.
That's a good movie.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. One of the other things that I was, just because I always like to do a little bit of reading, and back in 2010, they had actually hired some writers to write Doctor Strange, and so it's in the works. And by 2011, I thought this was really interesting that Patrick Dempsey himself was actually lobbying to play the role, which I was thinking to myself, I could totally see that working, because he kind of has the persona that you would need. Obviously, you got to have the Doctor Strange type hair. He's got that too. And I was like, that's an interesting choice. I mean, I'm sure that, obviously that's not the way they go, but I think he probably could have done a pretty interesting job at it.
It would be interesting, but I don't think it would work. And that's because of his voice. I think that what really sells Cumberbatch in the role above everything else is his voice lends itself to this type of character.
I can see that.
He has a very commanding voice, and I think that that's extremely important when it comes to a character that you have to believe can do these mystical things. Like there's definitely an image in our little lizard brains where we associate certain vocal qualities with certain personality types. And Patrick Dempsey, all due respect to him, because I think he's a fine actor, I don't hear his voice and think Doctor Strange. Now, he could have done something, but I think that Cumberbatch is much more naturally in that zone of voice.
Oh, I mean, I 100% agree with you, because, the other people that they considered were like Jared Leto and Ethan Hawke and Oscar Isaac and Ewan McGregor and Matthew McConaughey and Jake Gyllenhaal and Colin Farrell, and Keanu Reeves was on the short list, as well as Ryan Gosling. So it's like there were a lot of people that they at least thought about or even considered. But in the end, from what I've read, it sounds like they really always wanted Cumberbatch, and I think that makes sense. So
yeah, it does. I mean, the thing is, whenever I hear stuff like that, though, where it's like, well, we always really kind of wanted Mark Ruffalo, but we just had to go with Edward Norton, and it's like, I don't know how much of that is spin, and it's just the cynic in me that every story you ever hear is, well, we really kind of wanted this person all the way from the get-go. And that always seems like spin to me. But Cumberbatch, I think, definitely was 100% on the short list. His star's on the rise. You can get him for less than somebody who's going to ask for $20 million a picture or something like that. I think Oscar Isaac would be extremely logical as a choice. And, of course, that Disney winds up wanting to work with him enough that he winds up in the sequel trilogy. And I could see Isaac doing it. I could see that. He's got the right look with the way his eyes and his hair is everything's right for him as well. But Ryan Gosling or Keanu Reeves, I don't believe either one of them was truly on the short list.
Yeah, me either. Was this one of the Marvel movies at this point? Did you see this in the theater?
No, I didn't. I don't remember why I didn't. But life gets busy. What year did this come out again? This would have come out in
This is 2016.
2016? 2016 would have been the year that I started prepping for our move, actually. So life was starting to get pretty interesting and busy. But I think that, Doctor Strange was definitely a property I would have been interested in. specifically because it was one of the comics that I always stole from my brother's collections because the character was always fascinating. Some of the ways I like to doodle actually come from the way that they would show the magic manifesting on his hands. They had some great art in the Doctor Strange runs. What about you? You made it out to the theater for this, yeah?
I did, yeah. And, I at this point, just I'm on the Marvel train, and so I'm definitely along for the ride, pretty much like everybody else in the cosmos and or the multiverse at this point. And so I wanted to ask you then about just the, once seeing it and the character and the presentation of this character, how you felt about Doctor Strange and maybe even how he kind of came across as compared to other characters. Because for me, this is something that I've actually, it's become a hurdle that I personally had to get over with this movie.
Oh, I know exactly where you're leading, and I know I won't be original in the least to say that it's Magical Iron Man. It's almost as if they looked at that script and said, okay, well, let's get him to where he needs to be faster. He gets there a little bit quicker in terms of the injury. He's got the outsized ego, the quippy behavior, the quasi-love thing going with an intimate coworker who knows him really well and tolerates his zaniness. So there are so many things that are similar, but they do make, I think, necessary enough departures. I think that, and I I'm not trying to tip my hand or anything, but I think that it remains the case that this character doesn't really find his footing until, I'd say, probably the end of the first reel is when things start to get comfortable. It feels like they're not quite sure how fast they want to get to certain key parts. But once they cross that, that's when everything settles down and the character finds his own identity. I mean, do you feel the same way? Do you feel that this is just a parrot of the Iron Man script or formula or anything like that?
Mm-hmm. I actually went back to look at my original written review of this on my blog to kind of familiarize myself with that. And I honestly haven't seen this movie since the movie came out. Like, I've never watched it again.
Oh,
and
okay.
So, yeah, this was kind of really coming at it very fresh because I had vague recollections of things, but I didn't really remember much of the film. And so I think that actually really helped. And I was at the place beforehand where this did feel like, and I think you rightly pinned it as Magical Iron Man. And I always did feel like it felt a little bit too much like a formula. And and again, that's not necessarily a terrible problem because Marvel has been very successful up to this point. I think what was interesting is rewatching this, and I was really struck by the way that, you talked about the things that move pretty quickly, but I was also struck by the way in which they really do let him be almost worse than Tony in some ways. Like, he's even more egotistical. He has even more of a God complex. And I really loved, especially rewatching it, how they let Stephen experience his own medicine, in the sense that, he has spent his life building up his own reputation and not worrying about anybody else. And now he's at the place where he is the long shot that nobody wants to touch.
Right.
And he experiences what he has done to so many other people. And he's the loser that nobody wants to have anything to do with. And I was just really struck by that. And the way in which they allow him to be able to lash out, especially at Christine. When he just lets her have it in his apartment.
Yeah.
In the nastiest, most mean-spirited way possible, as people do in that type of pain. And I felt like rewatching it, there was actually a depth here that I didn't really catch on the first run. And part of that comes from the fact that I think Cumberbatch reaches into every scene, especially like those, and he plays them so well that he's making the most out of all of these emotional beats, to which, if it had been another actor, it might not have, I think, been as successful as that, especially found it in this rewatch.
Yeah, I agree Cumberbatch does some deft work. And what I want to do is go back to something you pointed out. He experiences his own medicine, which I think is a very good way to put it, because they call attention to the fact that he's turning down patients because he doesn't want to be bothered with, at one point he says, and ruin my perfect record. He doesn't want to do anything that is going to make him look less than perfect. And
exactly
the thing that makes that worse than what Tony did, although Tony was selling, weapons of war and stuff like that, what makes that worse than what Tony did is that it's a very personal level. Tony is selling something, and it's enough of an abstraction you can understand how somebody could be dissociated from it and just say, yeah, it's not my responsibility for somebody using it incorrectly. I just made it.
Sure. Yep.
And that, that has its own sort of philosophical discussions that go along with it. But for somebody to sit there and legitimately turn down the potential to save a life or do life-altering surgery simply because they don't want their reputation harmed, that's a very specifically personal thing. And it is difficult to be there with him when there's that one scene in particular right before he loses his temper with Christine, where the doctor hangs up on him and says, no, this is too risky. I'm not going to do this. No. And he's at the end of his rope. And what I want to ask you, though, is with his affliction, with his condition, with where he is emotionally, do you think that they take too many shortcuts after that point to get him to Kathmandu? Or do you think that it flows? Do you think there's too much of a speed up, let's get there process going on? Do you think that should have been allowed to breathe a little bit more?
The one thing that I would have liked, and I thought this in my rewatch here, was when he gets there and she kicks him out, I would have liked for her to basically pull the whole, he's going to spend months there. And basically we see a montage of him being there for God knows how long, right?
Right.
Of, having to patiently wait outside the door, turn into a beggar, to do whatever he needs to do, to get by. I think that's the one thing. And again, you can do that in 30 seconds of film.
Yeah.
You don't have to spend a long time, but I think what it does is it just adds this tiny layer there to let you know that he is completely desperate.
I like that.
That, there's nowhere else for him to turn. He's got nothing else. So he will either die on this doorstep or they'll let him in. And I think that's the one thing they could have done. Otherwise, I do think, especially again, rewatching this, I was really harsh on this movie, I think, from the get-go, in my first go, and I was really surprised that, especially once he starts his training, it doesn't just, click and, they just go at warp speed. They spend time with him, learning and kind of being impatient, but, them teaching him lessons, and then it takes a while for them to get to the point where you cross with the villain, So I was actually really impressed. That's just the one thing I would do. So I
like that. I think that's a great change that would have benefited the movie greatly. I I like where you went with that. I don't know if you'll like where I'm going to go after that, but so long as we're talking about the training and the Ancient One bringing him in, this movie did, of course, garner a bit of controversy before its release because the Ancient One is supposed to be Tibetan. And because Marvel wanted, and Disney wanted this to play in China, they changed the race of the Ancient One. Nobody really cares. I don't think anybody really cares that they changed the sex of the Ancient One. It's, you flip stuff like that all the time in movie adaptations, and it's never a one-to-one. Do you think that the movie... okay, two-part question. One, do you think it was an inappropriate change on their part to put in Tilda Swinton? And then two, regardless of all of that baggage, do you think Tilda Swinton presented a character who was believable in this role? Did you buy her as the Ancient One?
So I think it's a twofold part answer to the first question, which is I think it is inappropriate for Disney to kowtow to China and make the change for that reason. I think making it a woman and making it Tilda Swinton and making her of Celtic descent because you find her and you think to yourself, oh, I think she'll nail this. I don't have a problem with. That's not something I think is the problem. I think the problem is that we know the reason they did this, and that's wrong.
Yeah. Having
her in the role, and, again, I think it's kind of neat to kind of give her this magical lineage from being a Celt, which, obviously we know has a very long line of magical lineage, and Tilda Swinton is one of the most unique actresses in the world in the sense that she can play so many different types of roles, and she just kind of melds into that. And I bought her as being somebody who had lived a very long time, was an Ancient One. And I thought that there was something very interesting about her with Stephen, because in many ways I felt like she came off like M to Bond, where she loves this character, but she is going to give him tough love to make him what he needs to be. And I thought that really worked. There was this matronly relationship, I think, that they ended up having, so that by the time they actually have that conversation where she is dying and they're in the astral plane, there is this really emotional quality to him losing her because she's been the only one to believe in him. She's been the only one. And so I think she nails it. And she's actually one of my favorite parts of this movie. It is just, I would say, disgusting that Disney makes the decision that they do for that reason.
But isn't that so interesting, is we live in an age where we know the reasons for why they do things. And we didn't, in my lifetime, and I know in yours too, there was a time where we didn't know these things. It's just things that happened, and you didn't know the behind the scenes stuff. And it really does become one of those things where knowledge seems to become like a poison chalice sort of thing, where we're all addicted to it. We're all addicted to knowing everything. But at the same time, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should just ease off. But I'm gonna take it another step further. I know that you don't have a problem with switching things up. I don't have a problem with it. I always go back to one of the best switch casting types of things was the Shawshank Redemption, where they cast Morgan Freeman in a role that in the original short story, and I believe in the original script, was a short red-haired Irishman. And instead, Morgan Freeman was just the best actor for the role, and they liked what he brought to it, and so they said,
the best actor.
Well, no, but that's the thing, is they said, no, he's gonna bring something to this role that's That's great. And that's why it's still a very, very funny line in the movie, like a double inside joke reference thing where he says, why do they call you Red? And he says, maybe it's because I'm Irish, and they laugh. And so it works. But do you think that if we didn't know that reason, that we would have sort of a counter reaction to it about changing the Ancient One to a woman, basically? Do you think that we would still be like, is it a damned if you do, damned if you don't in terms of knowing the reason why?
I think for my part, it wouldn't be, because if it hadn't been for the reason that we know, I don't know the comics well enough to care, personally, and I don't think it's really an important, like, this is not an important change. The Ancient One could be male or female, and I don't think it makes a difference to who the character is. And like I said, I do feel like that it really actually ended up adding to the relationship between the two in a way that helped the story even more so than it would have been if it had just been a guy. So,
right. Well, and that's the thing that I'll tack on is I'm not somebody that gets up on a soapbox about anything, but how many opportunities for women were there to appear in this movie? And you have to start looking for those opportunities to make a change so that you don't just have a slate of guys walking around. And it's so I think it actually winds up being the most logical choice because it's a prominent role. It's a role that can be played well. It's a role that doesn't matter whether it's male or female. So, okay, it's not a big thing.
Well, and I do think, you could go a step further and say by changing the role as well, the character that Strange is, I can't imagine that not only is he going to look down on her because of her mystical beliefs, but her just being a woman in general could add to that dynamic as well of his arrogance, right? And I think that's another layer that gets added here to which he may, and they don't portray this in the movie, but it's just another layer that you can add on there that is really good.
Well, they do have, Rachel McAdams has a throwaway line when they're talking about the Strange maneuver or something like that, where it's very clearly implied that he's a womanizer and he doesn't necessarily treat women particularly well. So I think you're onto something there, that there could be a subtext, but I don't want to belabor the thing because I agree with you.
It's a good question,
works. And Tilda Swinton works in the role, I will always butcher his name. Please forgive me.
Oh, it's
Chiwetel Ejiofor, I think is how the pronunciation is.
Chiwetel Ejiofor.
I apologize.
It's a tough name.
But I've been a fan of his for years. I see him walk on screen and I'm like, oh, I like this guy. I remember the first time I ever saw him was actually in Serenity, the wrap-up movie for Firefly.
Oh, yes.
That was the first time I ever saw him, and I went, wow, that guy's awesome. My reaction to him is sort of like in Serenity was similar to my reaction to Ken Watanabe the first time I encountered him, which was in The Last Samurai, where I went, wow, that guy, I want to see more of him in movies. But I'll tell you, he does a great job, but Marvel struggles by this point with finding the right balance of comedy. I'm going to put forth that Doctor Strange actually finds a good balance of comedy, and I think a great part of that is the casting for Wong is so perfect. I could not imagine another person playing this role. The first time I saw it, even when I wasn't nuts about the movie, and regardless of what I'm going to say about it later, Wong is the character for me in this movie, because I think that he's the one that brings a very necessary lightheartedness without being jestery about it. He's not a jester.
Yeah.
He's just a unique character who's legitimately funny and played pitch perfect.
Yep.
I love Wong. He is every time I see him in any of the Marvel movies from this point forward, I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I like him that much just based on this. I mean, did you have the same reaction? Was there somebody else who was stronger? Or?
No, I think Benedict Wong playing Wong is phenomenal. And like you said, I think he is the perfect choice because I think when we talk about this on Aggressive Negotiations and when we talk about Star Wars here, a lot of times is that Star Wars humor is more sarcastic in nature.
Yeah.
In its humor. And I think one of the things that Doctor Strange finds is that a lot of the humor here isn't just straight up comedy for the most part, except for a few moments with the cape.
Yeah.
Which I think that's not humor that they try to take too far. I think a lot of the humor in this is very biting, sarcastic type of humor, right? Because it's a lot of characters who think they know better than the others, and they may or may not actually know better than the others. And I think Benedict Wong is really perfect in that type of role. And so, no, I agree with you. And just, I think to add a little bit on that with the humor, I think this is one of the movies to which Marvel did seem, especially in this rewatch, I was very surprised, they did seem to be willing to allow this movie to take itself more seriously than some of the previous or maybe subsequent films, because I rewatching this, I was really shocked because there is some real like emotional depth to this film, and it does kind of need to take itself slightly more seriously because you're introducing the multiverse, you're introducing the idea of different realities and magic, and so you really actually need this movie to be much more grounded. And so I found this movie to be much more in the vein of, and people might think this is weird, but the Incredible Hulk and the original Iron Man, in the sense of like, it just feels like everything feels very grounded until we get into the really fantastical. And it doesn't feel as weird to be in that fantastical because we haven't just been making everything a big joke the whole time.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I think even the way that they wind up having his accident, because I actually wound up thinking about it. What loved is the wrong word, but what I think worked so well is so many times through modern filmmaking, they're very clumsy about making some sort of statement about this type of behavior. Smoking is bad, this is bad, that's bad, everything's bad, whatever. And it's always heavy-handed, or most of the time it is. Whereas with this, when you break it down, he gets in a car accident because he's paying more attention to his phone than he is to the road.
Yeah. And it's his arrogance, right? He's driving 100 miles an hour on little roads when it's raining, thinking that, one, he's better than everybody else. He deserves to be everywhere else faster. And everybody if they would just get out of my way. And like, it's a statement about this character and his arrogance. And it's a perfect way to show that. Sure.
But I mean, I think just that minor thing roots it in the real world, because Tony Stark, the way he gets injured is okay. Like, it works. I'm not taking anything away from it. And the way that, the way that Peter Quill gets taken as well, he gets abducted by aliens. Like, it's all of this fantastical stuff. This is an origin story that is especially chilling. And I'm saying, in support of your thing about how the real world is the real world here, this is one of those things where it's like, oh, yeah, this is exactly believable that this could happen to somebody. I don't have to make any sort of logical leap. This is how the real world works. And as a result, I think that lends itself the credibility on that sort of subconscious level for us to then go in and say, okay, you've established that the real world is the real world, so I'll go with you into the mirror universe or the mirror dimension, and walk on buildings and watch New York fold on itself and have these portals going around, because you've established that these places are all real as I understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm willing to let go of that part of it and invest more of my imagination in the stuff that you're telling me exists outside of it. So,
yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And, I think one of the things that I gravitate towards first time I saw this movie, and even more so, I think the second time I saw this movie, is that conversation that he has with the Ancient One, where, she says that arrogance and fear still keep you from learning the simplest and most significant lesson of all, which is, it's not about you. And I absolutely love this theme, and I love the way that the film has supported this so far. From, we were just talking about the idea of the realism, but in that realism, this person who's so self-absorbed that they care only about their own look to everybody else and their own, record, and could never have an actual relationship with Christine because he's too selfish. And by the end of the movie, right, what's he willing to do? He's willing to spend eternity, if he must, with Dormammu to save the world.
All right. We'll jump through there. I was going to ask about Mads Mikkelsen, but so long as we're talking about Dormammu, I love the ending of this movie. Even when I was lukewarm on it as a whole, the ending of this movie is one of the best endings in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, period. First off, the fight in Hong Kong is ridiculous. Like, it is off the hook ridiculous how good the effects are, how well edited everything is. With everything that's going on in that battle sequence and all of the stuff going on, you never lose your sense of place. I can understand where everybody's moving and where they are in relation to everything and everyone else, even though we're dealing with stuff where we're reversing time and putting people in walls and having buildings fall over and bricks flying everywhere and stuff moving backwards while they're moving forwards. I can still see, and it was such a joy. It's still such a joy to watch. And when he gets to Dormammu and he starts going through, I think this is something that ties into what you were talking about with the rooting, the humor and everything like that, is it's still legitimately funny when Dormammu realizes and he goes, "Well, wait a minute, he what's happening?" And he pieces it together, and they don't just go forward. They do enough of a montage to show exactly what somebody like an entity like Dormammu would do, which is just lash out and just torture and punish. And Strange is like, yeah. And even the way that they vary the line read, when he first appears to Dormammu, is so magnificent. And so I wanted to ask you, I mean, are you as boffo about the ending? Were you as boffo about the ending the first time you saw it? Did you like the ending as much as I did? I mean, the ending of this movie is the one thing I've always talked about whenever I've discussed it, because I just think the ending is so freaking perfect.
I think when I first saw the movie, it felt like, to me, kind of big Marvel thing. But seeing this movie again, I'm 100% on your side that it is a fantastic ending. And I think the beauty of it is that, and this is something that Amanda and I were talking over on the 602 Club about with the Hawkeye show, is there is this narrative cohesion about this film to which all the main thematic points continuously flow throughout the whole film till you get to the resolution and you feel like you've earned the moment that you're in.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think makes this ending work even better for me now. And I 100% agree with you. It still looks phenomenal. Like, this is some of the best CGI work I've ever seen Marvel do, hands down. But it's legitimately satisfying because I feel like the character has earned the place from being a complete a-hole to being somebody who's slightly less of an a-hole. In fact, so much so that he would actually be willing to spend the rest of eternity doing this if need be, if that's what it would take to save Earth.
Now, see, this is what's interesting, and obviously we agree about all of that stuff, but I do want to go back and hit on the effects, because it's the strangest thing, no pun intended or anything like that, but the effects in this movie are so incredibly consistent. They're more consistent than they were in Civil War. They're a billion times more consistent than they were in Age of Ultron. And it's one of those things where it will always baffle me, because you get to a movie like Doctor Strange and you see how consistent and well put together all the effects are, and how judiciously they're used and edited and all of those sorts of things. And you say to yourself, why can't they all be like this? It doesn't make sense that I'm going to go, and I know I'm going to go forward and I'm going to see some compositing stuff and some placement stuff where I'm going to say, but you, like, why couldn't you carry those lessons forward and just study that and say, oh, that's how you do it? I know it's a nitpicky, weird thing, but I think it gets to something we were talking about with the score on the last one, where when you're production lining these things, there are times where good enough is good enough. And it's so refreshing visually. And again, this goes all the way back to my first viewing. It's very refreshing to get to a point where you can tell that for a team that was working on it, good enough wasn't good enough. They want it to be great. And as a result, you get visuals that made me wish I had seen this in the movie theater. Mm-hmm. And when I rewatched it this time, again, I watched the IMAX enhanced version, which, let's be honest, on TV, that means nothing. And, you know, what would you do? You got rid of the black bars. I'm like, it's still on my TV. I wish they would re-release this so that right before Multiverse of Madness, I want to go see this on the big screen.
Man, yes. Yes. No, I 100% agree with you. And it is, and maybe this was a film where they realized the effects have to be spectacular, because if not, you can't buy the magic in this film.
Right.
And, you know, I was reading and them talking about, you know, they didn't want this to turn into feeling like Harry Potter style magic or feeling like a Fantasia sequence. You know, they really wanted this to be special and to feel unique. Now, it's less unique in the sense that we had seen some of these type of effects in Inception, but then this takes those Inception type effects and then just, you know, runs with them.
Cranks it up to 11.
And so, exactly. So, I think maybe that's the case, whereas some of the other movies you can kind of, they feel like maybe they can fudge it, but absolutely here, you don't. And they don't. And I think it's a huge benefit to the film, because you're never drawn out of the movie being like, oh, well, that doesn't look right. No, this always looks right.
I do, before we jump to music, because we both put a pin in that last time, because this is where Michael Giacchino, I never know how to pronounce his last name.
Something Italian, yeah.
Yeah, you know. This is his first entry into the Marvel Universe. But before we get to him, Mads Mikkelsen as the villain. Do you think he was used effectively? Do you think that it would have been better to leave it so that it was just simply a battle against Dormammu breaking through, and so it was more of an abstract thing that they built to? Mm-hmm. Or do you think that Mikkelsen is used appropriately and his character is effective as, you know, the for lack of a better term, the Saruman type figure here?
Sure. I think what makes this work really well to me is that, and I really appreciate it about this go around, is because this movie has such a spiritual bent to it. You know, I mean, one of the big lessons we have here is that Strange comes in thinking he knows everything and realizing he knows nothing.
Yeah.
Especially about his view of the universe. And so on a spiritual aspect of this movie is that Dormammu is a character who is wooing Caecilius by telling him that the dogma to which he believes in is wrong, and that he will give him everything he wants without telling him the truth. So in many ways, we have this like magical paradise lost, right? Like you're being promised everything, and yet what it is really a lie. And so what are you going to put your faith in? Are you going to put your faith in this dogma, or in this foundational belief that the Ancient One has, or are you going to trust, basically, the Satan of the multiverse? And so I think it works really well to have a character who is a physical representation of the temptation to which we all kind of face every day, which is to take knowledge that maybe we don't need or that shouldn't have.
We're not mature enough to process. We don't have the wisdom to handle it.
Which is the whole point of then the Ancient One using that same the power, but for the benefit of, like she has the wisdom of how to use it correctly. So
what's interesting, just as a tack on to that, is this time watching it, I was thinking to myself that I would like to see something similar to the way this movie goes for the origin, the split between the Jedi and the Sith. I could see this as take the Dormammu figure, but I mean, you could still have a Dormammu figure because we know about the world between worlds and everything. You could still have that type of figure there. But I was looking at it and I was like, this has a very Lucas, Filoni, Star Wars type of feel of there's a bigger battle beyond us, but the way that battle goes is going to be determined by us, because it's a chess game with living, thinking people who are fighting against each other for the cause, as opposed to direct intervention, between the two, sides or anything like that. But I do think that this is a template where I wish that somebody at Lucasfilm would look at it and say, that could be a really great ancient Star Wars movie, or even short series. Like, I think there's the template there for this, because, to your point, you have, the Jedi basically, and then you have somebody who splits off and takes people with him, saying, no, we're meant to rule. And I've got the power to do it. I know how to do it. I studied the rituals that you said I shouldn't know. And I can open this doorway and I can make all of that happen. And I mean, obviously with the Jedi and the Sith, there wouldn't be the resolution or anything. But yeah, I think that at its core, if I reverse engineer it, that final battle in Hong Kong doesn't happen without the adversarial force on this physical plane. So I think that in and of itself, that's why those characters are necessary. I think if I'm going to ding the movie for anything, it's the fact that watching these things, I know Doctor Strange is going to make it to the end of the movie. So there's never quite the sense of peril that I want there to be for the character. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I 100% think it does.
All right. So
and it is a part of all of these films. Like it's the convention of watching just about any superhero movie. Your main character's not going to die,
right.
So it just, especially when it's their introduction film, right? So, so we have a really big composer come in to the MCU here for the first time. And, of course, he'll go on to do the Spider-Man films as well. But what do you think of his take? I mean, does it work for you? Is it better than some of the other ones where it's been like slimy yet satisfying?
I think it's a satisfying score. I do. I think it's a good score. I think it's a very Giacchino score. I can hear him in it. That's not a bad thing. And I'm not dismissing it. I don't think it's one of the great scores, but I think it's a very good score. It is something that I could put on and have in the background when I'm working. But it's not something where, again, it's not the first thing I think of when it comes to the movie Doctor Strange. What about you? Do you think that he excels here, or do you think that this is, this is a good score that does the job and maybe a little extra?
It's really interesting because there's a lot of his isms I can hear in it. There's a lot of the things that I've heard him do in other places kind of feel it. And there's senses of obviously 2009 Star Trek in here. Yeah. He definitely has specific things he likes to do with his like soft piano type of movements for things in big moments. I think this is a good score. I think it does exactly what the movie needs it to do. It adds to the scenes. I think it has some nice work. And one of the things that I think is interesting about it is the fact that it doesn't feel overly bombastic. And part of that, I think, leads to this film, even in its craziest aspects, feeling more grounded. Sure. Because the music itself isn't overly, it's not taking over scenes in crazy ways. So I think there's something special in that sense about it. I don't think, again, like you said, it's definitely a score I can listen to like when I'm working or whatever like that, because I think it's got pleasant melodies and stuff enough. But the theme for Doctor Strange, I still can't really hum it in my head the same way I can with the Avengers or Captain America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment.
Yeah.
So I mean, the thing is, I'm legitimately curious because we've gone back and forth. We haven't had too much negative to say, even though we both came from a place with our first viewings years ago as, I gotta ask, like, what is there that's negative? What is there that you would truly ding this on?
Yeah. I think the one thing was what I said earlier, where there's that one minor change that I would have made with just his time spent waiting and just adding, a couple more beats there and then, how he come in.
Yeah.
I was, and that is a much different reaction than I had the first time, where I felt like this was more formulaic. And I think this is actually maybe a movie that shows how you can take the formula and still make a really good movie at the same time. Like you can use it to the fullest effect. So I honestly don't have a lot that I would ding this for. Was there anything else that you would say, I might have done this a little bit differently, or this kind of bothered me even in my second rewatch? Or
I know that you're tired of hearing this. We've been having discussions like this for so many years, but I do think that it's clunky in the beginning. I think there's too much of a sense in its assembly in the beginning of needing to get where it's going. And as a result, there's an impatience to it. And I don't know if that's because they know the audience is not going to be patient by this point. So I think what works against it is that its structure in the beginning, before he starts training, is all very, even though we have a great car accident that puts him where he is, I do think it needed more time to breathe. So this is going to sound weird, but the movie could have been a little bit longer. Not a lot. 5 minutes. Maybe 10. Where you're absolutely right. Some montage time of him out there for months, seeing maybe the seasons change or something. But additionally, there's not really a clear sense of how long he's pursuing options. And I think the movie benefits from a couple of montages put in there. Tender moments even, where he's just listlessly staring out the window, and Rachel McAdams is tending to him and trying to talk to him and trying to get him, so that when he does pop off, you get more of a sense of he's not just snapped, but it's been over time. He's just hit the end of his rope so bad. Makes him more sympathetic when he gets to that moment. So again, as tiring as it is for people to hear me say it, it's that first reel is always difficult. And in this one in particular, there isn't enough patience. Now, once it gets past that first reel, once it settles down, it's good. And it really finds its groove, and it has a great pace, and it keeps you entertained straight through. And the best thing any movie can do is have a terrific ending. Because if you nail the landing, you can forgive a lot of stuff. Rogue One. Let's go back.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
Of course.
Yeah.
You can screw up the first, the first 30 minutes or whatever, or first hour even. But if you stick that landing, okay, you've bought a lot of goodwill for me. That's actually better than the inverse, which is a fantastic opening and a crappy end.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that, and one of the things that I've just got to give the movie credit for is, and I really appreciated the character and the relationship between him and Christine, because obviously they have this relationship that's semi-romantic and has been romantic before and is not quite as romantic at the moment because of, his ego. But one of the things I really appreciated about this is there is this unconditional love that she has for him and he has for her. And regardless of whether or not they're together, it's still there. And I thought that was pretty special to see, because sometimes people are really unlovable, and that doesn't mean you stop loving or caring for them, and I think she gives him some pretty tough love. That I think in many ways, after they have that blowout fight, I think that's one of the things that really gets him searching for something else. Because I think he realizes what he said. And he went too far and he crossed the line. And so now he's willing to look anywhere, do anything. And so I and her performance is really, really good. She's funny in the beginning. She's heartwarming and she's just everything you need this role to be, and more with the time that she has on screen, which is very minimal.
Yep. Completely agree.
So ratings. I mean, we're there.
Yeah, we're
there, man. We're there.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one because this leap is such that I don't want to get ahead of myself and wind up trying too hard to course correct.
Right.
I looked it up. First rating I gave it was 2.5 stars, which on a 5-star scale, on a 5-star scale, 2.5 stars is, I didn't hate it. It's it's good. And it lent itself all to, I didn't really like what came before the end, but that ending was wow. And that was where the 2.5 stars comes from. This time around, and this is the thing, is I don't want to overcorrect, but I honestly think I wound up landing at a 4 because this is good. I really enjoyed it. The effects are incredible through the whole thing. And once it settles down, it's just a darn good movie with a really solid message. And that ending, the first time I watched it, I thought was really clever. I love when it's not that the enemy is dumb, but the hero is smarter.
Right.
That's why I love Solo: A Star Wars Story. It's about the hero outsmarting somebody. But then now this time looking at it and how that ending is so structured around the idea of self-sacrifice, and Strange actually saying, I'll do this for eternity. We can just keep doing this or we can work this out. And so I give it a 4. I think it's solid. This is a movie I'd gladly show my kids and like talk with them and say, hey, you know, what do you think it's trying to say here? What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm giving it the exact same rating, and I would say, in all honesty, I mean, I could give this a 4.5, but I still think it's a solid 4, and that's up from a 3.5 for me. But I have a much bigger respect for this movie than I did beforehand, and it's moved up my Marvel rankings pretty far because of it. This is a Marvel movie to which, coming back to it, I'm realizing I'm going to watch this more often.
Yep.
Because I just enjoyed it much more, and I don't know if it's age or if it's just being able to look at it with a different perspective, or just feeling like there's so much of this movie that I do feel like thematically is even more relevant today than it was before, you know, and I just always love when that happens. And I think in many ways too, the relevance has just continued to be relevant, you know, like it's a message to which you can watch in any age and still is very important to hear. And I think that's what makes for the truly great cinema. So, yeah, I mean, maybe if I watch this again, it might go up to 4.5. I don't know. But it's definitely a solid, very, very, very solid 4. So.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the post-credits stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about it real quick before we get to ratings, because I do want to ask you about that. Obviously, we have the introduction of him meeting Thor, and before we get to Thor Ragnarok, of course, and then Mordo kind of taking away the power of Benjamin Bratt's character. I mean, what did you think?
The second stinger made me very intrigued, and this time around very regretful that everything in the world sort of delayed Doctor Strange too, because that would have hyped me up very much. I'm glad we watched it now, because with Multiverse of Madness relatively in the short range future,
it's very true. Yep.
Now I'm jazzed for it. Now I'm like, oh, I got to see where this goes. The Thor thing, it's fine. What about you?
So I think that the Thor thing is a good way to kind of put him in the Marvel universe, and it makes sense that he would be kind of the first person he would talk to. Since he's against magical threats, Loki is the biggest magical threat, right? At this point, so it's fine.
Yeah,
and but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That whole idea of like who and what threat could be there from the guy who can't realize that sometimes you can like bend rules for the greater good, right?
Yeah.
He is completely dogmatic, and so he's allowed that dogmatism to turn him into a fanatic, which is really interesting. Who knows if that'll play anything in the Multiverse of Madness, but where's this in the rankings, John?
Well, this actually winds up causing a very strange sort of reassortment of things, not just because of where it winds up, but it may be impacting where other things go. And that'll make sense in a second. So Winter Soldier, number 1, I'll be really interested to see if Winter Soldier ever gets knocked out for us from the first slot.
Same here.
Iron Man 3, Ant-Man, Iron Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Guardians of the Galaxy, and then Doctor Strange. Guardians of the Galaxy is where it is, but it's precarious. Doctor Strange could leapfrog over it, as I consider more. Guardians of the Galaxy will always have an emotional leg up because of the mom death storyline. Speaks to me on a very personal level.
Yes.
And so I freely admit that. But this time around, Doctor Strange, I was like, Captain America Civil War is right after it, but precariously so. Because this blast of enjoyment was, maybe I was a little too kind to Civil War. And then Captain America, Incredible Hulk, Avengers, Thor, and Age of Ultron is dropping from the next slot to slide underneath Thor the Dark World, which at the very least was cohesive. So it would go Hulk, Avengers, Thor, Thor the Dark World, Age of Ultron, and then Iron Man 2.
So for me, it moved up my Marvel ratings, and it did shift some things. So Winter Soldier, number 1, Iron Man, number 2, Iron Man 3, number 3, Civil War, number 4, the first Avenger is number 5, number 6 is Ant-Man, and then number 7, Doctor Strange, number 8, The Incredible Hulk, number 9 is Guardians of the Galaxy, number 10 is Avengers, and then number 11 would be The Dark World. Number 12, Iron Man 2. And number 13, lucky number 13. Did I miss? Oh, wait. Yeah, number 13, Thor. And number 14, down at the bottom, Age of Ultron. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
But it was really weird because, like Doctor Strange, it actually moved up. Like, if there are two halves of the Marvel Cinematic Universe for me, like a upper half and a lower half, it moved to the upper half from being in the lower half.
Yeah,
so
it's interesting.
It's crazy.
We both put it at relatively the same slot. So this one enters this round. But again, there's an asterisk here. This could wind up continuing to have a ripple effect down the way.
Mm-hmm.
So... Now, jog my memory. We have to jump over off of Disney Plus to Spider-Man next. Is No Way Home, or not No Way Home, but Homecoming is next.
As we move forward, we're actually going to be hitting Guardians of the Galaxy 2 next.
That's next.
We'll be on Disney Plus still, or I've got it on disc. But then we do get to Homecoming, which I actually ended up buying the dual that and Far From Home. It was like $20 on Apple TV, like both of the movies together. So I was like, well,
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
But since we got to watch them anyway, and later Marvel rewatches, I'm sure, one day. But so coming up, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 next, Homecoming, then Thor Ragnarok, and then a really big film, Black Panther. So, and then we'll hit Infinity War, Ant-Man and Wasp, Captain Marvel, Endgame, and Far From Home. And that would be all of Phase 3.
Yes, it will. Looking forward to it. Cool.
Well, John, if people, just want to catch up with you, maybe talk some Marvel stuff or see where Kessel Coin is these days on the currency trade, where can people find you?
Well, Kessel Coin will always be at the top of the cryptocurrency trade. It's very sneaky because you need a secret handshake and double encoded password just to start a discussion about it anywhere. I'm the only one with the keys.
Can I use my encoder ring? Does that work?
I'll let you use your encoder ring as so long as it isn't the one I'm thinking of. You got to use your the one from A Christmas Story, not the one from The Last Jedi, because that encoder ring was no good. Anyway, you just look for Kessel Junkie. I'm out there, KESSELJUNKIE, and I'm over on the Nerd Party co-hosting 2 shows: House Lights, where we look at the work of directors, and a Star Wars show, which has been on a brief hiatus at this point. Life has been very, very busy, but is coming back in full force. No pun intended. Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast that I co-host with you, Matt.
And I hope everybody will check it out. While you can also check me out on places like Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero under the name MattRushing02. Of course, here on the network with the 602 Club, as well as doing Warp 5, The Orb, and Literary Treks. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And I do have a finished show over on the Nerd Party, which was called Owl Post that I did with Drea Kaufman. and we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But as always, we want to thank you so much for joining us.
Avengers!